David Chen had just walked away from everything he'd worked for. 12 years as a corporate attorney, climbing the ladder, making partner at 35. But somewhere along the way he'd lost himself. The long hours, the constant pressure, the cases that meant nothing to him personally. He'd wake up at 3 in the morning with his heart racing, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was really all there was to life. So he quit, just like that. His colleagues thought he'd lost his mind. His parents were horrified, but David felt lighter than he had in years. He had some savings, enough to get by for a while. What he needed now was to figure out what actually mattered to him. He started volunteering at the Riverside Community Center, a modest building in a working-class neighborhood not far from where he'd grown up. The center offered after-school programs for kids whose parents worked late. David didn't have any grand plans. He just showed up, helped where he was needed, and tried to be useful. That's where he first noticed the boy. Tommy Lee was 10 years old, small for his age, with a mop of black hair that kept falling into his eyes. While the other kids ran around playing basketball or doing arts and crafts, Tommy sat by himself in the corner of the reading room. Day after day, same spot. He'd have a textbook open in front of him, but David noticed he wasn't really reading. He was just staring at the pages, his shoulders hunched, looking like he carried the weight of the world. David didn't approach him right away. He'd learned in his years as a lawyer that sometimes people need space. But he watched, and he wondered what was going on in that kid's head. It was Mrs. Patterson, who ran the center, who finally filled him in. Tommy's mom, Linda, worked 2 jobs, breakfast shift at a diner, evening shift cleaning offices. Tommy's dad wasn't in the picture. Linda was doing everything she could, but there was never enough time or money. And Tommy was struggling badly in school. He's at risk of being held back, Mrs. Patterson said quietly, glancing over at Tommy. His teacher says he just doesn't get it. Math, reading, all of it. Linda's tried to help him, but by the time she gets home, she's exhausted. And tutoring costs money they don't have. David felt something stir in his chest. He walked over to where Tommy was sitting and pulled up a chair. The boy looked up, startled, like he wasn't used to people paying attention to him. "Hey," David said. "I'm David. Mind if I sit here?" Tommy shrugged. He didn't say no, which David took as permission. "What are you working on?" David asked, nodding at the math book. "Fractions," Tommy muttered. Then so quietly David almost missed it. "I'm stupid at them." "You're not stupid," David said automatically. Then he paused. "Can I see?" Tommy slid the book over. David looked at the problems. They were 4th grade level, but he could see where Tommy had tried to work them out. The attempts were there, but the logic was all mixed up. This wasn't a kid who couldn't learn. This was a kid who'd been taught one way and that way wasn't clicking for him. "What if I helped you?" David offered. "Just for an hour or so, a couple times a week. No charge, just 2 people working on some problems together." Tommy looked suspicious. "Why would you do that?" It was a fair question. David thought about it. "Because I think you're smarter than you believe you are. And I've got time. So why not?" Tommy didn't answer, but the next day he showed up with his math book. And the day after that, they started meeting twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, right there in the community center. At first it was rough going. Tommy had built a wall around himself, convinced he was just dumb, that school wasn't for kids like him. Every time he got a problem wrong, he'd shut down, push the book away, say he couldn't do it, but David was patient. He'd spent years dealing with difficult clients, navigating complex negotiations. A frustrated 10-year-old? He could handle that. He started to realize that Tommy wasn't struggling because he couldn't understand concepts. He was struggling because the way they were being taught didn't match how his brain worked. Tommy was a visual learner, a hands-on kid. You couldn't just show him numbers on a page and expect it to stick. So David changed tactics. For fractions, he brought in a pizza, cut it into slices. Suddenly, 3/8 made sense when Tommy could see it, touch it, understand it as something real. For word problems, they acted them out. David would be the shopkeeper, Tommy the customer, and they'd work through the math together. Slowly, something began to shift. Tommy started getting problems right. Not every time, not at first, but enough that David could see a flicker of something in the boy's eyes. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of confidence. Tommy's mom, Linda, came to the center one evening to pick him up. She was still in her diner uniform, looking exhausted. When she saw David working with Tommy, she approached hesitantly. "Mrs. Patterson told me what you've been doing." she said. Her eyes were wet. I don't know how to thank you. I wanted to pay you, but I can't afford. David held up his hand. I don't want payment, really. Tommy's a good kid. We're just working on some math together. Linda looked at him like he'd just told her the sky was green. People didn't do things for free, not in her experience. There was always a catch. Always something they wanted. But as the weeks went by and David kept showing up, kept working with Tommy, kept refusing any kind of payment, she started to believe that maybe, just maybe, there were still good people in the world. By the end of the school year, Tommy's grades had climbed from failing to passing. Not straight A's, not yet, but C's and B's, solid progress. More importantly, Tommy smiled now. He participated in class. He believed, for the first time, that maybe he wasn't stupid after all. On the last day of school, Tommy brought David a drawing he'd made. It was crude, done in crayon, but David could make out two stick figures sitting at a table with books between them. That's us, Tommy said shyly. Thanks for helping me. David looked at that drawing, at this kid who'd gone from defeated to hopeful in just a few months, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose, meaning. The sense that what he was doing actually mattered. He thought that might be the end of it. Summer was coming. Tommy would move on to 5th grade. Probably forget all about the man who'd helped him with fractions. But when September rolled around and the community center's after-school program started up again, Tommy was there, waiting with his new textbooks. I got promoted, he said, grinning. I'm in 5th grade now, but I'm going to need help with decimals. David smiled and pulled up a chair. Then I guess we'd better get started. What started as twice a week turned into something neither David nor Tommy had expected. It wasn't just tutoring anymore. It was friendship, mentorship, something that filled a gap in both their lives. David had always been too busy for relationships when he was practicing law. No time for a family, barely time for friends. Now sitting with this kid, watching him figure out a tough problem, seeing his face light up when something finally clicked, David realized what he'd been missing all those years. And Tommy? Well, Tommy had never had a father figure. His dad had left when he was 3 and he barely remembered him. His mom did her best, but she was always working, always tired. Having David around, having someone who showed up consistently, who believed in him, who had time just for him, it changed everything. By the time Tommy hit 6th grade, he wasn't just passing anymore. He was actually doing well. His teachers noticed the change. The quiet, struggling kid who used to sit in the back now raised his hand, participated in discussions, even helped other students sometimes. But David noticed something else. Tommy was smart, really smart, but not in the traditional academic way. He was brilliant with his hands, amazing at figuring out how things worked. One day, Tommy showed up with a model bridge he'd built out of popsicle sticks for a science project. Look, Tommy said excitedly, pointing to the different parts. See how the triangle shapes make it stronger? That's called a truss. And if you distribute the weight like this, it can hold way more than you'd think. David watched as Tommy explained the engineering principles behind his design. This was a kid who'd been told he was stupid, who'd believed it himself. But here he was, understanding complex structural concepts that many adults couldn't grasp. Have you ever thought about being an engineer? David asked. Tommy laughed, but there was bitterness in it. Kids like me don't become engineers. That's for smart kids who can afford college. You are a smart kid, David said firmly, and we'll figure out the college part when we get there. Right now, I want you to remember something. Your brain works differently, Tommy, but that doesn't make it worse. Some of the best engineers I've ever heard of think exactly the way you do. Tommy looked uncertain, but David could see the seed being planted. The idea that maybe, just maybe, he could be more than what everyone expected. Middle school brought new challenges. The homework got harder, the social dynamics more complicated. Tommy got bullied sometimes for spending time with an older guy instead of hanging out with kids his own age. David heard about it when Tommy showed up one Tuesday with a black eye. What happened? David asked, concerned. Tommy wouldn't meet his eyes. Some guys at school. They said stuff. I fought back. What kind of stuff? That it's weird that I hang out with you. That you're probably some creep or something. Tommy's voice cracked. I told them you're not. That you're just helping me. But they wouldn't shut up, so I punched Jason Miller. David felt his heart sink. He'd worried about this, about how it might look. A grown man spending time with someone else's kid. But everything had been above board. always at the community center, often with Mrs. Patterson or other staff around. Linda knew, approved, was grateful. Did you get in trouble? David asked. Suspended for 2 days. Tommy finally looked up and there were tears in his eyes. I'm sorry. I know you're gonna quit now. Everyone always does. David pulled his chair closer. Tommy, I'm not going anywhere. Those kids don't understand and that's okay. But you and I know what's real. We're not doing anything wrong. I'm just helping you learn, same as any tutor would. And I'm proud of you for defending that, even if punching wasn't the best choice. Really? Tommy's voice was small. You're not mad? Not mad. But let's work on using words next time instead of fists, okay? Tommy nodded and something in his expression settled. He'd been testing David in a way, waiting for him to leave like his father had. But David stayed, and that meant everything. High school was when things really started to come together. Tommy joined the robotics club and discovered he had a gift for it. He could look at a mechanical problem and just see the solution, understand instinctively how parts should fit together. David attended every competition, cheering from the stands like a proud father. But academics were still tough. Tommy could build anything but writing essays and memorizing historical dates. That was torture. David helped him develop strategies, ways to study that worked with his brain instead of against it. He taught Tommy that struggling with traditional schoolwork didn't make him less intelligent, just differently intelligent. When it came time to think about college, Tommy almost gave up before starting. We can't afford it, he said flatly. Mom's barely keeping up with rent. There's no way. David wasn't having it. Together, they researched scholarships. David helped Tommy craft his application essays, making sure his unique perspective came through. They highlighted his hands-on skills, his robotics achievements, his ability to think spatially and solve problems creatively. The night Tommy got his acceptance letter to the State University's engineering program with a partial scholarship, Linda called David, sobbing so hard she could barely speak. He got in, she kept saying. My boy got into college. Because of you. Because you didn't give up on him. No, David said gently. He got in because he's brilliant and he worked hard. I just helped him see what was already there. But privately, David felt a pride he'd never experienced in his legal career. All those cases he'd won, all that money he'd made, none of it compared to this, helping this one kid believe in himself. Watching him grow from a defeated 10-year-old into a confident young man heading to college, that was real achievement. They spent the summer before Tommy left working on additional scholarship applications. David kicked in some money quietly, telling Tommy it was from an anonymous donor at the community center. Between scholarships, grants, work study, and that mysterious donation, they covered everything. The day Tommy left for college, David helped him move into his dorm. It was a tiny room shared with another freshman, but Tommy looked at it like it was a palace. I can't believe I'm really here, Tommy said, looking around in wonder. A kid from Riverside going to college. David felt his throat tighten. You earned every bit of this. I want you to remember that when things get hard, and they will get hard, Tommy. College is tough, but you've overcome everything else life threw at you. You'll overcome this too. Tommy turned to him, and suddenly he wasn't the confident young man anymore. He was that scared 10-year-old again, uncertain and vulnerable. What if I fail? Tommy asked quietly. What if I get there and I'm not good enough? David put his hands on Tommy's shoulders. Then you'll get back up and try again. That's what you've always done. But Tommy, listen to me. You are good enough. You're more than good enough. Those professors are lucky to have you. They hugged then, both of them trying not to cry and failing. Over the next 4 years, they stayed in touch. Weekly phone calls at first, then every other week as Tommy got busier with classes and projects. David didn't mind. This was how it should be. Tommy was growing up, becoming his own man, building his own life. But whenever Tommy came home for breaks, they'd meet up at the old community center. They'd sit at the same table where they'd worked on fractions all those years ago, and Tommy would tell David about his classes, his projects, his dreams. In his junior year, Tommy met a girl named Rachel in his structures class. By senior year, they were inseparable. David met her during one of Tommy's visits home and liked her immediately. She was smart, funny, and she looked at Tommy the way everyone deserves to be looked at, like he was someone special. On graduation day, David sat with Linda in the crowd, both of them crying as Tommy walked across that stage in his cap and gown. Tommy Lee, the kid who'd been told he was stupid, who'd almost been held back in fourth grade, was graduating with a degree in structural engineering. At the celebration dinner afterward, Tommy raised his glass. "I want to thank two people," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "My mom, who worked herself to the bone to give me a chance. And David, who taught me that being different isn't the same as being less." David raised his own glass, unable to speak. He'd walked away from law looking for meaning, for purpose, for something that mattered, and he'd found it in a community center, with a struggling kid who just needed someone to believe in him. What David didn't know as they celebrated that night was that their story was far from over. The best part was still to come. Tommy landed his first real job 6 months after graduation. A structural engineering firm in the city hired him, and suddenly the kid who'd built bridges out of popsicle sticks was designing real ones. He was the youngest engineer on the team, and he attacked every project with the same determination he'd brought to conquering fractions all those years ago. David couldn't have been prouder. They still talked regularly, though less frequently now. Tommy had his own life, his career, his relationship with Rachel. This was exactly what David had hoped for. Tommy standing on his own 2 feet. But David would be lying if he said he didn't miss those days at the community center, watching Tommy's face light up when he finally understood a concept. Life had a funny way of coming full circle, though. David, now in his early 50s, had found his own path too. He'd gone back to school, gotten his teaching certification, and now taught at an alternative high school for kids who struggled in traditional settings. Kids like Tommy. Every day he saw versions of that 10-year-old boy, students who'd been told they weren't smart enough, who'd given up on themselves, and every day he thought of Tommy and refused to give up on them. One Tuesday evening, David's phone rang. Tommy's name flashed on the screen. "Hey, kid," David answered. "How's the bridge building business?" "Amazing, actually." Tommy's voice was buzzing with excitement. "David, we just got assigned the new Riverside Crossing project. You know that area where they're connecting the north and south sides of the city? I'm on the design team. Me. I'm actually going to help design a bridge that thousands of people will use every day." David felt goosebumps rise on his arms. Riverside, the neighborhood where it all started, where a struggling kid and a burned-out lawyer had found each other at a community center. "That's incredible, Tommy. They're lucky to have you." "I kept thinking about it," Tommy continued. "How it's the same neighborhood where we met, where you taught me that I wasn't stupid, and now I'm going to build something there, something permanent. It feels like, I don't know, like things coming full circle." They talked for an hour that night, Tommy explaining the technical challenges of the project, David asking questions and listening with pride. Before they hung up, Tommy said something that stuck with David. "You know what the weird thing is? Some of the engineers I work with, they went to fancy private schools, had tutors their whole lives, every advantage. And they're good, don't get me wrong, but they think inside the box. Me, I think different, and that's actually an advantage. You taught me that." After they hung up, David sat in his apartment thinking about the path they'd both traveled. 15 years. Had it really been that long since he'd first sat down next to a defeated 10-year-old? The years kept moving. Tommy thrived in his career. The Riverside Crossing project took 3 years to complete, and when it opened, David was there at the ceremony. He watched Tommy stand with the other engineers, accepting recognition from the mayor. Tommy caught his eye in the crowd and smiled, and David knew exactly what that smile meant. We did it. That kid everyone gave up on, he built a bridge, but Tommy never forgot where he came from. Once a month, he volunteered at the same community center where David had helped him. He worked with kids who were struggling with math and science, kids who thought they weren't smart enough. He told them his story, showed them that different didn't mean less. David would sometimes stop by and watch Tommy work with the kids. It was like looking in a mirror, seeing his own patience and encouragement reflected in Tommy's teaching style. The student had become the teacher. Rachel and Tommy moved in together. David met her family at a barbecue they hosted. Good people, salt of the earth like Linda. They welcomed David warmly, and Rachel's dad pulled him aside at one point. "Tommy talks about you all the time," he said. "The man who changed his life. That's pretty special." David shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. "I just helped him with homework." "No," Rachel's dad said firmly. "You gave him something money can't buy. You gave him belief in himself. That's everything." As Tommy approached 30, He'd become someone David barely recognized from that scared fourth grader. Confident, successful, well-respected in his field. He'd presented papers at engineering conferences, mentored junior engineers, even taught a class at his old university as an adjunct professor. But he never lost his humility, never forgot the struggle. At a conference where he was giving a keynote speech about innovative bridge design, Tommy opened with his story about being the kid who almost got held back, who thought he was stupid, who couldn't understand fractions until someone showed him a pizza. Different brains need different approaches, he told the audience of engineers and academics. Some of the most innovative thinkers I know struggled in traditional classroom settings. We need to stop asking people to fit into one mold and start celebrating the diversity of how humans think and solve problems. The speech got a standing ovation. David watched it later online, tears streaming down his face. That was his kid up there, advocating for other kids like him. David was teaching a particularly challenging student, Kevin, who reminded him so much of young Tommy it was almost eerie. Same defeat in his eyes, same conviction that he was just stupid. David invited Tommy to come talk to his class one day. Tommy showed up in jeans and a casual button-down, nothing fancy. He sat on the edge of a desk and talked to these struggling teenagers like they were his equals. Fourth grade, I was failing everything, he told them. Teachers said I wasn't trying hard enough. Other kids called me dumb. I believed them. I thought that's just who I was, the stupid kid who'd never amount to anything. The students were riveted. This wasn't some out-of-touch adult lecturing them. This was someone who'd been where they were. Then this guy. Tommy pointed at David. He sat down with me and refused to let me quit. He didn't teach me the way everyone else did. He figured out how my brain worked and met me there. And slowly I started to realize something. I wasn't stupid. I was just different. He pulled out his phone and showed them pictures of the Riverside Crossing Bridge. I helped design this. Me, the kid who couldn't pass fourth grade math. Because someone believed in me before I believed in myself. After Tommy left, Kevin approached David. Mr. Chen. That guy Tommy? Did he really almost fail fourth grade? He did, David confirmed. And now he builds bridges? Now he builds bridges. Kevin was quiet for a moment. Then, maybe I could do something like that too. David smiled. Yeah, Kevin, I think you could. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. David taught. Tommy built. They met for dinner once a month and talked about everything and nothing. Linda, now retired from her second job and working just part-time at the diner, joined them sometimes. She'd aged well, the stress lines around her eyes replaced with laugh lines. You two are my biggest accomplishment, she told them once over Chinese food. Tommy, my brilliant son, and David, my family, even if we don't share blood. Blood doesn't make family, David said. Love and time do that. On the 15-year anniversary of their first tutoring session, they met at the community center. Mrs. Patterson had retired, but the new director let them in after hours. They sat at the same table where it all began, now scarred with years of use. 15 years, Tommy said, shaking his head. I was 10 years old. I thought my life was already over. And now? David asked. Now I build bridges. I mentor kids. I have a career I love. A woman I'm crazy about. A mom I can actually help support now instead of the other way around. Tommy looked at David. I have a life I never imagined was possible, and it's because you gave an hour of your time to some random kid. Best investment I ever made, David said quietly. I need to tell you something, Tommy said. His voice was serious now, and David felt a flutter of concern. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Everything's right, actually. Rachel and I are getting married. David's face split into a grin. Tommy, that's wonderful. Congratulations. Yeah, but here's the thing. Tommy pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. I wanted to ask you something, in person. The old-fashioned way. David opened the envelope. Inside was a formal wedding invitation, cream-colored paper with elegant script. But attached to it was a handwritten letter. As David read it, his vision blurred with tears. You want me to be your best man? His voice cracked on the last word. There's no one else it could be, Tommy said simply. I know traditionally it should be a brother or a best friend from childhood. But David, you are my best friend. You have been since I was 10 years old. You're the most important man in my life. So yeah, I want you standing next to me when I marry Rachel. David couldn't speak. He just reached across the table and gripped Tommy's hand, both of them crying now. 15 years of history between them. I don't know what to say, David finally managed. Say yes, Tommy said, laughing through his tears. Yes, of course. Yes. The next few months were a blur of wedding preparations. David had never been someone's best man before. He'd been to weddings, sure, stood on the sidelines watching other people's happiness, but this was different. This was Tommy, his kid, the one who'd changed everything. Rachel welcomed David into the planning with open arms. She'd heard so many stories about him over the years that meeting him had felt like meeting a character from a beloved book. At their first planning dinner, she hugged him tight. "Thank you," she whispered, "for making him into the man I fell in love with." David was uncomfortable with the praise, as always. Tommy did that himself. "No," Rachel said firmly, pulling back to look at him. "He told me everything. About fourth grade. About thinking he was stupid, about wanting to give up. You didn't let him. So thank you." The wedding was set for early June at a garden venue outside the city. Nothing too fancy. Tommy and Rachel weren't those kinds of people. But it was beautiful, with string lights and flowers and enough space for the 100 or so guests they'd invited. David threw himself into his best man duties. He organized the bachelor party, though at Tommy's request it was low-key. No strip clubs or wild nights. Just Tommy, David, and a few of Tommy's close friends from college and work. Spending an evening at a batting cage and then getting dinner at Tommy's favorite burger place. "This is perfect," Tommy said, biting into a massive cheeseburger. "I don't need anything fancy. Just the people I care about." One of Tommy's friends from work, Pete, leaned over to David. "Tommy talks about you all the time at the office. At first I thought he was exaggerating, you know? The mentor who changed his life, like something out of a movie. But seeing you two together, I get it now. That's real." As the wedding approached, David felt the weight of the best man speech. He'd argued cases in front of judges, negotiated million-dollar deals, but standing up in front of 100 people to talk about Tommy terrified him. What could he possibly say that would capture what these 15 years had meant? He wrote and rewrote the speech a dozen times. Everything sounded either too formal or too casual, too jokey or too serious. Finally, Linda came over one evening and found him surrounded by crumpled papers, looking frustrated. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting down the groceries she'd brought. "The speech. I can't get it right." Linda sat down across from him. She'd aged gracefully, her hair now more silver than black, but her eyes were still sharp and kind. "David, just speak from your heart. Tell them the truth. That's all anyone wants to hear. What if I mess it up? What if I cry or forget what I'm saying or—" "Then you cry," Linda interrupted. "Then you mess up. Tommy won't care. He just wants you there." David looked at this woman who'd become like family to him. Did you ever imagine it would turn out like this? When I first started helping him with homework? Linda smiled. "Honestly? No. I thought you'd help him for a few weeks, maybe a month, then move on with your life. People don't usually stick around, especially for free. But you did. Week after week, year after year. You gave us both something to believe in." "He gave me something too," David said quietly. "Purpose. A reason to matter." "I know," Linda said. "I've watched you both grow. It's been a privilege." The week before the wedding, Tommy called David in a panic. "What if I mess up the vows? What if I trip walking down the aisle? What if—" "Tommy," David interrupted, laughing. "Breathe. You designed a bridge that thousands of cars cross every day. I think you can handle a wedding. That's different. If I mess up a calculation, I can fix it. If I mess up in front of everyone we know, then Rachel will still marry you because she loves you, and everyone will think it's endearing." "Tommy, you're overthinking this." There was a pause on the other end. Then Tommy laughed, a little shaky. "I'm being ridiculous, aren't I?" "A little, but it's allowed. Getting married is a big deal." "Yeah," Tommy's voice softened. "David, I'm really glad you're going to be standing up there with me. I don't think I could do this without you." "You could," David said, "but I'm honored that you don't want to." The rehearsal dinner was at a small Italian restaurant that Linda had suggested. She'd waitressed there years ago, and they'd given her a good deal on the private room. It was perfect, warm, and intimate, filled with the people who mattered most to Tommy and Rachel. David sat between Linda and Tommy's college roommate, Jake, watching Tommy and Rachel at the head of the table. They kept looking at each other and grinning like they couldn't believe their luck. Young love, but the real kind, built on friendship and mutual respect. When it was time for toasts, Rachel's father went first, welcoming Tommy into the family. Then Rachel's best friend told embarrassing stories from college. Everyone laughed, the wine flowed, and the room felt full of joy. Then Tommy stood up and the room quieted. "I'm not supposed to give a speech until tomorrow," he said. "But I wanted to say something tonight while we're all together. Rachel, you know how much I love you. Everyone here knows. But there's someone else I need to thank because without him I wouldn't be the man you're marrying." David felt his stomach drop. Tommy was looking right at him. "David, you probably don't remember the first time we met. I was this scared, angry kid who thought he was stupid. You saw something in me I couldn't see in myself. And for 15 years you've been the father I never had, the teacher I needed, the friend who never gave up." David's eyes were burning. Around the room people were pulling out tissues. "Tomorrow when I stand up there and marry the love of my life, you're going to be right beside me. And that's exactly where you belong. Because you've been beside me every step of the way. Thank you for believing in me before I believed in myself. Thank you for showing me that family isn't just blood. Thank you for changing my life." The room erupted in applause. David couldn't see through his tears. But he felt Tommy's arms around him, both of them holding on tight. Later, after the dinner ended and people were heading home, David stood outside the restaurant looking up at the stars. Linda came out and stood beside him. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," David said. "Just thinking about how strange life is. 15 years ago I was miserable, lost, wondering what the point of everything was. And now look at us. Now look at us," Linda echoed. "My son's getting married. To a wonderful woman. He has a career he loves, and I get to watch it all happen." She linked her arm through David's. "We did good, didn't we?" "We did," David agreed. "We really did." That night, David finally finished his speech. He stopped trying to make it perfect and just wrote what was in his heart. About a 10-year-old boy with sad eyes. About fractions and pizza and slowly building confidence. About watching a kid grow into a man. About finding family in unexpected places. About how 1 hour a week could change 2 lives forever. He folded the paper and put it in his jacket pocket. Tomorrow he'd stand up in front of everyone and share this story. He'd probably cry. His voice would probably shake. But he'd do it because Tommy had asked him to. And after 15 years, he still couldn't say no to that kid. The morning of the wedding, David woke up early. He got dressed in his rented tuxedo, feeling awkward and formal. He'd never been a tux kind of guy. But when he looked in the mirror, he thought of Tommy as a teenager, nervous before his first robotics competition, asking David if he looked okay. "You look great." "Kid," David had told him then. Now it was David's turn to be nervous, to wonder if he looked okay. He straightened his bow tie and headed out the door. The venue was already bustling with activity when he arrived. Florists finishing arrangements, caterers setting up tables. Rachel's mom directing everyone like a friendly general. David found Tommy in the groom's suite pacing in his tuxedo pants and an undershirt. "Hey," David said. "You getting ready to bolt?" Tommy spun around and the relief on his face was palpable. "You're here. I know I'm being ridiculous, but I was worried you might not show up." "Tommy, I've showed up every Tuesday and Thursday for 15 years. Did you really think I'd miss today?" Tommy laughed, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "No, I guess not. Help me with this tie?" As David tied Tommy's bow tie, the same way he'd helped him with a regular tie before his first job interview, both of them were quiet. The moment felt heavy with history, with all the years that had led them here. "There," David said, stepping back. "You look good, kid." Tommy looked at himself in the mirror, then at David standing behind him. "We really made it, didn't we?" "Yeah," David said softly. "We really did." The ceremony was scheduled for 4 in the afternoon when the light would be golden and perfect for photos. David stood with Tommy at the altar, watching the guests file in and take their seats. He recognized faces from over the years. Mrs. Patterson from the community center, now retired but still sharp as ever. Some of Tommy's college friends, colleagues from the engineering firm, Linda in the front row wearing a beautiful lavender dress and crying before the ceremony had even started. The music started. Rachel's bridesmaids came down the aisle first, then her flower girl niece taking her job very seriously. And then Rachel appeared and David watched Tommy's face transform. Pure joy, pure love, the kind of happiness that made everyone in the audience smile just from witnessing it. Rachel was beautiful in a simple white dress, her father walking proudly beside her. But David couldn't stop watching Tommy. This was the same kid who'd sat in the corner of a community center, defeated and alone. Now he was standing here, confident and loved, about to marry his best friend. The ceremony was short and sweet. Tommy and Rachel had written their own vows, and there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd when Tommy promised to always believe in Rachel the way someone had once believed in him. David knew Tommy was talking about him, and he had to work hard to keep his composure. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the crowd erupted in applause. Tommy kissed Rachel, and they walked back down the aisle together, grinning like they'd just won the lottery. Which, in a way, they had. The reception was held in the garden under those string lights that made everything feel magical. Dinner was served, toasts began, and David felt his stomach tighten. His speech was next. Rachel's best friend went first, telling funny stories about their college days. Then Rachel's father spoke, welcoming Tommy officially into the family and joking about how his daughter had found someone who loved bridges as much as he loved her. Everyone laughed. The mood was light and joyful. Then the DJ announced David, and suddenly 100 people were looking at him. He stood, his legs shaky, and walked to the microphone. The folded paper with his speech was in his jacket pocket, but suddenly he wasn't sure he needed it. These words were carved into his heart. 15 years ago, David started, his voice not quite steady. I walked away from a career that was making me miserable. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew that something was missing from my life. So I started volunteering at a community center, trying to figure out what mattered. He paused, looking at Tommy, who was watching him intently. That's where I met this 10-year-old kid. He was sitting by himself in the corner, staring at a math book, looking like he carried the weight of the world on his small shoulders. His name was Tommy Lee, and he thought he was stupid. A few people in the crowd made sympathetic sounds. Linda was already crying again. I asked if I could help him with his homework. Just an hour or two a week, nothing fancy. And honestly, I thought it would be a few weeks, maybe a month. I didn't expect what happened next. David's voice was getting stronger now, the nervousness fading as he fell into the story. Tommy changed my life. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I got to watch this brilliant kid slowly start to believe in himself. We worked on fractions using pizza. We acted out word problems. We figured out together that his brain wasn't broken. It just worked differently. And somewhere along the way, this stopped being about tutoring and started being about family. He looked around the crowd, making eye contact with the people who'd been part of this journey. Mrs. Patterson nodding and smiling. Linda clutching a tissue. Tommy's college friends who'd heard the stories but were seeing the reality. I watched Tommy struggle through middle school. I watched him get bullied for spending time with me. And I watched him defend our friendship even when it cost him. I watched him discover robotics and light up like I'd never seen. I watched him apply to college, get accepted, graduate. I watched him become a structural engineer, and not just any engineer. A brilliant one. Tommy was crying now, not even trying to hide it. Rachel had her hand on his arm, tears streaming down her own face. Some of you might not know this, David continued, but Tommy was the lead designer on the Riverside Crossing Bridge, the bridge that connects the north and south sides of our city. Thousands of people cross it every day, and it was designed by a kid who was almost held back in 4th grade because people thought he wasn't smart enough. There was applause, but David held up his hand. He wasn't finished. But here's what I really want to say. When Tommy asked me to be his best man, I was honored, humbled, terrified, honestly. Because how do you put 15 years into a 5-minute speech? How do you explain what it means when someone lets you into their life, trusts you, grows up in front of you? His voice cracked and he had to pause to collect himself. Tommy, you've thanked me over the years for helping you, for believing in you, for not giving up. But you need to understand something. You saved me too. When I met you, I was lost. I had success, money, status, all the things I thought mattered. But I was empty. And then this kid showed up who needed help with fractions, and suddenly I had a purpose. I had something real. David looked directly at Tommy now, ignoring the crowd, just talking to his kid. You taught me that the best things in life can't be measured in billable hours or case wins. They're measured in moments, in breakthroughs over homework, in late-night phone calls when you're stressed about exams, in watching you walk across a stage to get your diploma, in standing here today watching you marry the love of your life. He had to stop again, his vision blurred with tears. Rachel was crying openly now, and so was half the crowd. I never had children of my own, never thought I wanted them, but then I got you, Tommy. And I got to be part of raising an incredible human being, someone who builds bridges, who mentors kids who struggle like he did, who proved that everyone who underestimated him was wrong. David pulled out a tissue and wiped his eyes, not caring anymore about maintaining composure. Rachel, you're getting someone special, but I think you already know that. He's going to love you fiercely, support you completely, and make terrible jokes about engineering that only he finds funny. There was laughter through the tears now. Tommy, you asked me 15 years ago why I was helping you. I told you it was because I thought you were smarter than you believed. That was true. But here's what I didn't say because I didn't know it yet. I helped you because you were meant to be part of my life. Because some people come into our lives and change everything. You did that for me. He raised his glass, his hand shaking slightly. So here's my toast. To Tommy and Rachel, may your marriage be built on the same foundation we built our friendship on. Patience, trust, belief, the willingness to show up, even when it's hard, the courage to be vulnerable, and the understanding that family isn't just blood. It's the people who choose to stay, who choose to love, who choose to believe in us when we can't believe in ourselves. Everyone raised their glasses. To Tommy and Rachel, David said, his voice strong now. And to the journey that brought us all here, thank you for letting me be part of it. The crowd erupted in applause, but David barely heard it, because Tommy had stood up and crossed to him and they were hugging, both of them crying, 15 years of history and love and gratitude flowing between them. Thank you, Tommy whispered, for everything, for all of it. Thank you, David whispered back, for being my family. When they finally pulled apart, the crowd was on their feet, applauding. Rachel came over and hugged David too, whispering her own thanks. Linda pushed her way through and wrapped her arms around both David and Tommy, the three of them holding on tight. The rest of the reception was a blur. David danced with Linda during the mother-son dance since Tommy asked him to share it. He posed for countless photos. He accepted handshakes and hugs from people telling him what a beautiful speech it was, how much they'd cried. But the moment that stuck with him came later, as the evening was winding down. Tommy found him standing at the edge of the garden, looking up at the stars. Hey, Tommy said, coming to stand beside him. He'd loosened his tie, his jacket was off, and he looked happier than David had ever seen him. Hey yourself, David said. How does it feel to be married? Amazing, perfect, right? Tommy was quiet for a moment. You know what I realized during your speech? What's that? That day you sat down with me at the community center. You weren't just helping some random kid with homework. You were saving my life. I was about to give up, David. On school, on myself, on everything. And then you showed up and refused to let me quit. David felt his throat tighten again. You would have figured it out eventually. Maybe. But maybe not. We'll never know because you were there. Tommy turned to face him. I need you to understand something. When I introduce you to people, I say you're my mentor. Sometimes I say you're my friend. But that's not quite right. He paused, his eyes shining in the string lights. You're my father, David. Not biologically, but in every way that matters. You're the dad I needed, the one who showed up and stayed. And I need you to know that, because I don't think I've ever said it out loud before. David couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Tommy wasn't finished. When Rachel and I have kids someday, they're going to call you Grandpa. They're going to hear stories about the man who taught their dad that being different isn't the same as being less. They're going to know that our family was built, not born. And they're going to be lucky to have you, just like I was. David pulled Tommy into another hug, both of them crying again, not caring who saw. I love you, kid, David managed to say. I love you too, Dad, Tommy said. And there it was. The word that had hung unspoken between them for years. Dad. Family. Forever. When they finally pulled apart, Tommy grinned. Come on, Rachel wants us in more photos. Something about capturing the moment. As they walked back to the celebration together, David thought about the path that had led them here. A burned-out lawyer looking for meaning. A struggling kid who needed someone to believe in him. Two people who found each other at exactly the right time. He'd walked away from his law career thinking he was giving up success. But he'd found something better. He'd found purpose. He'd found family. He'd found a son. The music was playing, guests were dancing, and Tommy and Rachel were in the middle of it all, laughing and spinning and starting their new life together. David stood at the edge of the dance floor, watching, his heart full in a way he'd never experienced in all his years of practicing law. Mrs. Patterson came up beside him. You did good, David. We all did good, David said. It took a village. Maybe, but you showed up first. That matters. As the night ended and the guests began to leave, Tommy and Rachel came to say goodbye before heading to their hotel. Tomorrow they'd fly out for their honeymoon. 2 weeks in Italy that they'd saved for and dreamed about. Thank you for being here, Rachel said, hugging David, for being part of our story. Thank you for loving him, David said. For seeing what I saw all those years ago. When Tommy hugged him goodbye, he held on extra long. See you in 2 weeks, Dad. See you then, son. David watched them drive away, tin cans tied to their bumper, their friends cheering. Linda came to stand beside him, linking her arm through his. We raised a good one, she said. We did, David agreed. We really did. As he drove home that night, David thought about the speech he'd given, about the journey from that first Tuesday at the community center to this moment. 15 years. Half of Tommy's life, all of David's best years. He'd gone looking for meaning and found it in the most unexpected place. In a struggling kid who needed someone to care. In hours spent working through homework. In watching a boy become a man, a student become a teacher, a stranger become family. The kid gave a best man speech, people would say when they heard the story. But that wasn't quite right. The father gave a best man speech. For the son who saved his life by letting him save his. And that made all the difference.